Hey guys, welcome back to my channel Neeraj Netra. In this video, we will be discussing the worst defeats of British Empire. So without further delay, let's begin. Now, first, Britain versus USA. Imagine an entire US Army brigade surrendering to the Taliban. And now you grasp the impact of the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. A British force of 7,000 men had laid their arms before an army that European experts had dismissed as colonial rabble. This was a battle that should never have been fought. Britain always had a small army for a major European power, and particularly small army for subduing an area the size of eastern North America. Yet Britain did have the Royal Navy, which conferred a strategic mobility that allowed the British to concentrate or evacuate their forces with a speed that George Washington's Continentals couldn't match. So, in the best British tradition for a content for the enemy, the British chose to mount an overland expedition deep in North American wilderness in autumn 1777, as far as naval support as the moon. General Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne would lead 7,000 men from Canada into upstate New York, where he would rendezvous near Albany with another force under General William Hovey moving north from this New York City. In theory, this would isolate the troublesome nest of revolutionaries in New England from rest of the rebellious colonies. Unfortunately, the British command was as divided as their forces. Instead of assisting Burgoyne, Hovey chose to occupy Philadelphia. Burgoyne had managed to recapture Fort Ticonderoga, but now found himself low on supplies with winter approaching. Instead of retreating back to Canada, he chose to press on to Albany. Meanwhile, the Americans eventually mustered a force of 15,000 militia backed by reinforcements sent by General Washington, including Daniel Morgul's riflemen and Benedict Arnold, a competent American commander before his defection. It wasn't only the British who suffered from divided command. Arnold quarreled with Harito Gates, the ostensible commander of the American force. But after two small battles at Freeman's Farm and Bemis Heights, Burgoyne's army found itself outnumbered, surrounded and isolated at Saratoga, far from any reinforcements or succor. Gentleman Johnny surrendered on October 17, 1777, thus preserving lives of his men from a hopeless battle. But the fact that the revolutionaries had destroyed a British army in the field helped convince France to ally with the fledgling American revolutionaries and declare war on Britain, later followed by Spain. Its impact on world history would be immense. Now, to the next one. Now, Britain versus South Africa. Battle of Isdalwana. Being defeated by the Americans was bad enough, but yet at least the Americans were Europeans by ancestry and culture. But surely spear-waving African natives would be no match for a force of well-armed and well-trained British troops. Such a racist stereotype was shattered at the Battle of Rocas Drift and was preceded by the defeat of Isandlwana, where the Zulus annihilated 1,700 British regulars and colonial auxiliaries at the Battle of Isandlwana on January 22, 1879. Britain had invaded Zululand ostensibly to revenge the murder of British subjects, but in reality to create an South African Confederation, which in turn required smashing the Zulu Empire. At Saratoga, British recklessly maneuvered them into a deadly position. British commander Lord Chelmsford split his 15,000 strong force into three separate columns, on the theory that this would enable the British to surround the Zulu army. Of course, they'll flee, was what he thought. Chelmsford commanded the main column of 5,000 men, which set up camp at Isandlwana, just 5 miles away from a Zulu army that the British scouts hadn't detected. Not only did he entrench his position, but he also split his force again, sending most of the column chasing after what he thought was the main Zulu army, leaving just 1700 men to guard the camp. But the main Zulu army of 20,000 strong was actually hidden near the camp, where when British scouts finally detected them, Zulus attacked. They wielded Iron Age spears and shields in the industrial age of steamships and machine guns, but Zulus proved what they highly organized, motivated and tactically mobile troops could accomplish despite technological inferiority. Their favorite tactic was the Isumpondo Zancomo, horns of the buffalo, where older warriors of the Zulu force engaged the enemy from front while the younger warriors circled around both flanks and attacked. Such tactics had won the Zulus a fierce reputation and an African empire. Now they destroyed the British. Now, on to the next crushing defeat of Britain. Battle of Denmark Straits. This happened in May of 1941 when the German battleship Bismarck was sailing from Germany into North Atlantic. The British reacted quickly. A German battleship let loose among the shipping lanes that sustained Britain with food weapons would be like a tiger in a chicken coop. The Bismarck was a formidable battleship, newer and more advanced than most of its British and American counterparts in 1941. Accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, it would have been a tough match in any battle. But as the German raiders passed through Denmark Straits, it was Royal Navy's misfortune that two ships that intercepted them on May 24th were the battleship Prince of Wales and the battle cruiser Hood. The Prince of Wales was fresh out the shipyard and still had dockyard workers about to finish the ship. The Hood had been launched in 1918 while World War I still raged. As a battle cruiser, fast but less well armored than a battleship, it wasn't meant to slug it out with a modern battleship like Bismarck. Even for a battle cruiser, it had weak deck armor, which left it vulnerable to plunging fire, coming on top of the ship instead of the sides. Rather than wait for reinforcements, the British closed for a battle in fight where the odds were even at the best. It was a classic clash of capital ships with none of those pesky aircraft or aircraft carriers to ruin the proceedings. Yet the Prince of Wales had gun malfunctions that reduced its rate of fire. Yet it was the Hood that made it a dark day for Royal Navy. After a few German salvos, the battle cruiser exploded with the loss of more than 1,300 sailors. The cause was probably, though not definitively, a magazine explosion caused by a German shell that penetrated its deck armor. The Prince of Wales inflicted 3 hits on the Bismarck, including a bow hit that caused some flooding and deprived the Bismarck of precious fuel oil in her forward tanks. But the fact was that Hood, one of the proudest ships in the Royal Navy, had been sunk and the Germans had lived to sail away. But not for long. The loss of Hood would be avenged. From a British Admiralty that came a simple 3-word order that would go down in history. Sink the Bismarck. Just as it was poised to reach safety in France, the Bismarck was crippled by antique swordfish torpedo bombers from the aircraft Ark Royal and finally sunk the British fleet. Singapore. This was a defeat of Britain in hands of Japan. After being beaten by impudent American colonists and fierce natives, who else would the British underestimate? Never fear. By the 1940s, it was Japan's turn. Pre-war British experts discounted the Japanese on a racist grounds, which was a big mistake. That racism bore bitter fruit in the first 6 months of the Pacific War, when the Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Navy disemboweled the Western powers across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. Nowhere this was better symbolized than the fall of British fortress of Singapore. Singapore had been considered an impregnable part of Britain's Asian empire that was Largely mythical, Budgetary penny pinching had left the island city a Potemkin fortress far from invulnerable. Nonetheless, with a garrison of 80,000 men, Singapore was expected to hold out for a while, perhaps until help arrived. Help wouldn't arrive. The US Pacific Fleet was mostly destroyed at Pearl Harbor. The battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse were sunk by the Japanese torpedo bombers off Malaya on December 8th, depriving Singapore of its naval shield. But much of the British disaster was incomprehensible rather than inevitable. Royal Air Force pilots, cocky from their victory over the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, found themselves outmatched by better trained Japanese pilots and their deadly Zero fighters. The Japanese force that landed on Malay Peninsula north of Singapore on December 8th was smaller than that of the defenders, but it outmaneuvered the British and outfought poorly trained and less British, Australian and Indian troops. Yamashita's army was outnumbered almost 3 to 1 and had to conduct a water assault across the straits separating Singapore from the mainland. The fortress fell within a week, resulting in the surrender of 80,000 prisoners, many of whom would not survive the brutal Japanese captivity. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, described the surrender of 80,000 men as the worst disaster in British history. Now, on to the next fight. The Gazala, also had taking place in World War II against Germans. It happened in North Africa. The same strategy that cost Britain its Singapore bastion nearly cost it in the Middle East. In summer of 1942, after Germans, Italians and British had chased each other back and forth across North Africa for nearly 2 years, the front had temporarily stabilized while both sides prepared for the next round. With its wide open waterless spaces and vast distances between populated areas, the North African campaign was more like naval warfare than tightly packed mass combat of the Somme or Normandy. Like the fleets at sea, armies constantly maneuvered through a barren landscape where most territory had little value of itself, bearing a few key ports and supply points like Benghazi and Tobruk. But in mid-1942, the British chose to bring the Maginot Line to North Africa, and with similar results to 1940. The Gazala Line, built near Tobruk, stretched from Mediterranean coast south into the desert. It consisted of a series of minefields and fortified boxes garrisoned by infantry brigades, backed by British armour held in the reserve to the rear. Unfortunately, the emptiness of the desert meant that there was no river or mountain to anchor the British defences, which left a dangling southern flank open in the desert. Leaving dangling flanks before the Germans was an invitation to disaster, and Erwin Rommel wasn't going to miss this party. Though British outnumbered Rommel's armour, but as at Singapore, British commanders were strangely lethargic, sending their armour in small uncoordinated packets against the concentrated German defenders. Poor tactics compounded the problem. British tanks attacked without infantry or artillery support would have neutralized the devastating lines of German anti-tank guns. But this didn't happen, and nor did Rommel didn't waste any time. He desperately cleared a path for his supply columns, refueled his tanks, and scattered the remaining British armour. Glittering before him was the prize of Tobruk, a fortress whose tough Australian defenders had successfully withstood Rommel's siege in 1941. But the defences were in disrepair. Its new South African defenders were unprepared, and the fortress quickly fell with the loss of 30,000 prisoners. Bolstered by the massive quantities of badly needed fuel and supplies, the Africa Corps pressed on to Egypt and nearly to the Suez Canal, only to be stopped at El Alamein. Africa Corps and its Italian allies, Rommel characteristically chose to attack on May 27, as should have been expected. He looped his armor around Britain's southern flank, while his Italian cannon fodder, who largely marched on foot in the desert, diverted the British by attacking their fortified boxes. If all went well, the British boxes would be surrounded and destroyed. But all didn't go well, and it was Rommel who was in trouble. Square in the path of German armor was the oasis of Bir Hadsheim, held by a very tough Free French brigade and foreign legionaries plus a detachment of Jewish soldiers. The German armor found itself caught between Bir Hadsheim and the British minefields with their fuel convoys unable to reach the tanks. British could have ended North African campaign then and there if their armor had struck decisively against the German armor. Coming 4 months after fall of Singapore, Tobruk was the low point of British fortunes. After nearly 3 years of war, the British army proved it could still not take on the Germans in an open battle. Thank you guys for watching the video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel, Neeraj Mitra. I will see you guys next week. Bye.